Hello again, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening as we are getting ready to learn more about the stories that save us until they hold us back. This live speaker series is brought to you by Encore Retreats, which hosts in-person and virtual events as well as global retreats. I'm Jennifer Sullivan, the co-owner and memory maker for Encore Retreats. And tonight we are so excited to introduce you to Laila Tarraf. Laila's resume is impressive. She got her MBA from UC Berkeley. She served as the Chief People Officer for Walmart.com, Pete's Coffee and Tea, and most recently Allbirds. She's an advisor, a board member, an executive coach, a sought-after speaker, a guest lecturer at Berkeley and Stanford, and she's the author of a phenomenal book, which we strongly recommend, called Strong Like Water. That is not the main reason why we wanted to interview her and share her with you. It's the very hard life lessons that Laila learned outside of work and her ability to take what she learned and totally change her perspective that make her so impressive. She is brave enough to balance courage and compassion, integrate head with heart, and infuse power and tenderness in the workplace. Needless to say, we are very lucky to have her with us. And Laila will be interviewed tonight by my business partner, Lisa Waltuck, who is the content creator for Encore Retreats. A couple housekeeping notes. We encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat so we can keep better track of them. And then I'll ask Laila your questions at the end of the interview. We'll also send out a recording of this session via email in the next couple of days. So without further ado, I will ask Lisa and Laila to turn on their cameras and microphones and take over.
Hi, everybody. We're really happy to be here with Laila. We are also committed to keeping this talk to 30 minutes. So we want to respect your time. So we're just going to jump right in and move along to all the interesting things that Laila is going to talk about. But some of you may not have read her book yet or have the pleasure of hearing her speak. So the first thing I want to do as we get into these stories about ourselves that we tell ourselves that may include limiting beliefs and hold us back until we understand them, I thought it would provide context if Laila could tell a story from her own life and how it allowed her to see that there were some constraints and how she broke free of those constraints. So Laila, if you could give us an example, that would be a great starting point.
Sure. Hi, everybody. At a high level, all of us are living inside of a story of our own creation. And we created this narrative based on our early childhood experiences and our interpretation of those experiences. And those stories are based on underlying beliefs. And like Lisa says, some of those are limiting. And unless you examine them, you don't grow. And so I'll give you an example from my life. Part of my narrative was I'm super strong and capable, and I'm really good at solving big, complex problems. And because that's who I was in my narrative, other people were not as capable as me. So I had this idea that that I couldn't really rely on anyone. And so I had to jump in and do things on my own. But because I was jumping in so quickly, I didn't really give anybody a chance to really help me. I couldn't even rely on them because they just looked at me and said, "Oh, she's got it handled." You've heard the self-fulfilling prophecy. I was kind of stuck in this closed loop, right? And I didn't notice it. And what happens oftentimes is when you are stuck in this narrative, in this cycle, it really drives your unconscious patterns of behavior. And until someone or something happens in life that really kind of knocks you off your game, you don't ever really realize that you're not truly awake to life as it's showing up, but really you're interpreting it through this narrow lens of your story.
And how can we break out of that? I know if something happens, if there's a catalyzing event that might cause us to do it, but what if we're listening to you here and now and we're thinking, oh, what are my stories and how am I looking at it? Is there a way that we can have an increased perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. You don't have to wait for a life crisis to knock you on your heels, although it usually does take some sort of big event, because, you know, as the saying goes, people don't change until the pain of changing is less than the pain of changing the same, of staying the same. And so I think the most important thing, what you can do is if you start getting a sense like, you know what, I'm stuck. I'm not getting the results, or I'm not getting the outcomes, or life is not showing up for me in a way that I want, and I don't know why. You're a little bit at a loss. If you can notice in those moments, if you keep hitting that point that I'm kind of stuck, I'm either things you've been doing are no longer giving you the same results, or you're just not able to get out of where you want to move, but you're not able to, this is a really good point for you to start getting really, really curious. And rather than just kind of like, you know, not pay very much attention, pause, self-reflect, and pay attention to what you might be resisting. Okay, so what is that? Maybe it's the part of you that feels hurt, the part that you've rejected or ignored. Maybe it's pain or embarrassment you're trying to hide, something you're denying yourself. Maybe it's that you struggle to ask help. Any sort of cognitive dissonance where there seems to be dissonance between what you're thinking and what you're feeling. Maybe it's physical. Maybe it's a knot in your stomach. These are all clues that you are likely covering up a deeper truth than the conscious core belief that you currently hold. And most of us have developed such strong coping mechanisms to deal with to deal with adversities in life in a way that we don't have to really deal with them, that we are off of that in a second. And so this first point is actually the hardest, because it requires you to self-reflect, self-observe, and if you can't do it in the moment, self-reflect in hindsight. Like, what just happened there? Like, I got really angry. I don't know what happened, or I shut down. What happened? So pay attention. Secondly, try to stay with that feeling. And if you're self-reflecting, try to go back and try to recreate, what was it that I was getting stuck about, or that brought up this, that triggered me into this emotional state. And just try to go a little bit deeper. Try to stay with that discomfort. You don't have to do anything with it. A lot of times we think, I don't want this to come up and I don't want to be present with it, because we feel we need to do something with it, but you actually don't. Just allow yourself to stay with that discomfort. Breathe through it if you need to, and stay in it as long as you can. If you do that over and over, you will start creating greater capacity, greater space, and your body will start giving you clues as to what's going on. Maybe an insight emerges. Maybe you realize, oh, I'm actually not angry. I'm actually quite hurt, or I'm embarrassed, or something else that comes up. There's 30,000 different emotions. So you're really doing this to start getting smart around your emotional and somatic intelligence. And then I guess the last thing that I would say is, when you start to self-reflect and really question whether these beliefs you've had your whole life are really true, recognize that your inner critic is going to come in and try to push you back, because the beliefs that you hold are core to who you are. And if you start messing with them, your super ego, your inner critic, doesn't like that, right? Because it wants to hold you where you are. It wants to stay in homeostasis. So just be super kind to yourself. Self-love, self-compassion, a little bit of levity goes a long way. If you start to internally berate yourself, it really stalls the process.
I'm curious, with those points and with looking at ourselves this way, for me, it's changed over time. So I think maturity has helped me not respond as like urgently or strongly. Now I feel even when faced with big issues, I'm calmer when I approach them. And I can only say that's like through experience or maybe self-awareness or something. So how does that play into looking back and who we are with our core beliefs if we've kind of evolved, as we've aged, as we've had more life experiences, as we've interacted with more people? How would you say that plays into this whole equation?
I think examining your story is the work that has to be done. Sometimes that comes with maturity and age, sometimes it doesn't, right? But it's the process of examining the narrative that you've held your whole life, taking a look at the beliefs that underlie that narrative, and continuing to question, is this true? Is this true? And it's that process, it's the peeling away, right? That helps you to start to discover what are your blind spots, right? So that you can become more self-aware. I mean, I remember I used to get this feedback at work that I had a bias for action. I'm like, yeah, I've got a bias for action. And I think for like 5 years, I thought that was a real compliment. And then finally, I've started connecting the dots because I heard it in different ways. I'm like, oh, bias for action is like a really generous way of saying that that sometimes I'm a little impulsive, that I move to action so quickly before I stop and think and really kind of assess what I should be doing. It's, instead of ready, aim, fire, it's fire, 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 fire. And a lot of overachievers do this. It's funny, in my coaching practice, I talk about this a lot and I understand it deeply because I came from that place. But it wasn't until I had enough data points and I started doing the work around myself and how people were reacting that I saw clearly how others saw me. And that's, you do it by continuing to examine how you're showing up and how people are reacting to you.
I think it's interesting that came from feedback. And that's the other thing I'm wondering is whether it's colleagues or a boss or friends or a spouse or relatives, how does kind of their interpretation of who you are and how you behave play into this also? Like, can you trust their observations more than your own, or can it be informative? How does that get integrated?
It's a great question, Lisa. Everyone has a filter. Everyone's living in their story. So it's like, well, how do I know the way you're seeing it is really the way? You don't. No one sees 100% exactly as it is. We all have a slight filter on what we see. I think we need to look at feedback as information, right? The more you trust someone, the more they really know you beyond just sort of how you show up behaviorally, the more you can trust the feedback. But this is why 360 reviews or, sort of 360 assessment is so powerful, because it is asking a number of different people in different parts of your life, in different parts of the organization, if you're doing it in a business environment, the same questions. And so I do these a lot. And when I do 360s with folks, I'm listening for the common theme, the common thread that's running through the feedback. And oftentimes there is a general few themes that run through. Very, very infrequently will it be like, well, wait, he said black and she said white, and how come that is? It's usually consistent. And then I think I could rely on it more. And then figuring out how you deliver that in a way that the person can hear it is the second step of delivering. So it's getting the feedback and how you deliver and how they receive it.
And have you had experiences where people were surprised, like, I can't believe I've been seen that way? Or like, is it usually, oh, I can see that? Or is it kind of a big, blowing their minds?
I've had both. It's if people have been doing work on themselves and they've heard something like it, it could be the unlock, like, oh, yeah. Usually when people say, oh, my wife says that, or my husband says that, you know, you've hit on a truth, because those are the people that know them the best. And I've had all three reactions, which is, nope, I don't see it. No, thank you. Okay. Because when the student is ready, the teacher appears. The student was not ready, and I was not the teacher in that moment. There's, oh, okay. And like they've kind of known it, like around the edges. And I've also had the, what are you talking about? And those are the most tender, because again, feedback is in service of someone's growth, not to bonk them on the head and tell them how broken they are, right? It's supposed to be, you know, one of my favorite things that my coaching instructor used to say is, coaching is about seeing what's beautiful in someone and getting them to see it too, not about trying to find all the things that you need to, quote, fix. They're going to do that themselves. That's not your job.
I think that the work too is self-awareness, because, you know, just from my own experience also with the Enneagram, I had never heard of the Enneagram before. It's a personality typing system, some of you may know, and people kept typing me as the same thing. And as I read about it, it didn't sound like me at all. And so it was the question, like, am I not understanding, or do I know myself better than these people that are giving me this label? And it took a few years for me to kind of really see who I was, and it wasn't that. But, you know, I don't know if that was deeper thought, self-awareness, really finding the thing that resonated with me. But I imagine that's part of it, is how open you are, how ready you are to look at yourself, and the skills that you have to be able to look at yourself.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Enneagram is a tool that goes to what the deeper motivations are underneath the behavior. So no one knows your core motivations but you. So you're the only one really that can type yourself. Other people can look at your behavior and say, oh, well, she's outgoing, or she's direct, or I had someone the other day, a friend of mine who's an attorney, refer me to someone and said, you're going to love Laila. She's blunt. And I'm like, blunt? I went back later. I said, am I blunt? He goes, well, you're direct. I said, but blunt? So you know what? I took it as information. And for him, he's an attorney. He goes, yeah, he goes, blunt is good. It means you get right to the bottom line. I'm like, okay, different connotations, you know? So I'm looking at Beth's comment in the chat about feedback being information. I think it's so important. I know feedback has such bad connotation around it, because somehow we feel like the person giving it, I don't know, has this power, and they're going to come and tell us. In fact, I think the best performance reviews are the ones that go both ways. The ones that where if I'm giving you a review, Lisa, and then I say to you, and hey, what can I do to better support you? What feedback do you have for me? Because just knowing that, you know, you're going to give me feedback too, probably has me thinking a little more deeply about how I should be giving feedback to you in a way that's, you know, direct but compassionate, hopefully.
And productive,
productive.
When you're doing this in a work environment, how much of it is kind of personality type, and how much does any of it feed into like productivity and, you know, the job? Like, you're looking at something personal and a personality type, but you also have the added requirement of, you know, that they get their work done and people move forward in a group setting.
You mean, is it harder to give feedback sort of on personal traits versus, oh, this report had these 5 grammatical errors in it, or something that's more business?
Or not so much that, but a kind of the right balance of personal and personality oriented and how they are in the work environment. Like, you could have somebody as a very, very high achiever in work, but maybe difficult to work in a team or something. I think that would be a difficult balance.
I think I always talk about the competencies needed to be successful in a particular role and at a particular level. and the qualities necessary to develop to be successful in those roles. And so, and I make sure to talk about the fact that we're all on this developmental journey that hopefully goes for the rest of our lives. And it's not possible to be amazing at everything, right? There are going to be areas that you spike, and there's going to be other areas where you're just going to have to work that much harder to be good at those. So I really believe in focus on your strengths. Like, why would you be in a role where the primary focus of the role was on an area for you that you have to put that much more effort to really be good at? And so I try to talk about sort of the outliers. Here's your towering strength. Here's how it shows up. And here's how, here's why it's your superpower. And here's why you don't want to push into it too hard, because an overused strength then actually starts to hurt you. Right. So command and control can be seen as great skills, but if you're too commanding and controlling, not so great, right? Or assertive gets to be aggressive, direct gets to be blunt. And then the areas that are a little bit harder, I talk about, what's possible to kind of get them from whatever number, from here to here, from here to here, if there's interest, right? I talk a lot about if there's will and there's skill, you can always develop your skills. The first thing that is, do you even care? Because you have a choice. Do you have the will? And if you don't, then I don't even go to the skill, because it's your development. I'm not trying to upskill you. You have to care about it.
And now with all this kind of insight and experience, how do you now live in your own stories? What story are you currently living in for your life?
My story 2.0.
Yes.
Well, as you know, and I think Jennifer is reading my books, for me, life had to show me that actually I wasn't in control of everything. And so my new story is that I am quite certain I control absolutely nothing, which really helped me in the pandemic, because honestly, I don't think I could have led during the pandemic if I was holding on to this old story that I had to have all the answers. I think I would have had a nervous breakdown, because nobody had the answer. There was no playbook. And so, I can't control everything. I'm sure everybody else knows that, but that was news to me. And that being strong and capable, which was so core to my persona, can only get you so far in life. And that actually my worthiness was not tied to my achievements. I mean, to me, those were my big ahas. And I still get triggered, and I have to remind myself. I still, okay, hold on, cool your jets, back up. But I'm on to myself much more quickly.
Yeah, that's good. That seems like a more comfortable place to be.
Yes. Yeah, mostly.
Thank you, Laila. I think we have, Jen, do we have some questions coming in? Yeah.
We do. Thank you, Laila, for telling us a little bit about your story. I know we have challenged Laila with compressing what is normally a keynote speech or a workshop into 20 minutes. So there's so much more to her story. And we definitely invite you to read her book. We'll include that in the follow-up email that we send out with the recording. And think of her for your companies too. But let me jump into the questions. You kind of touched on this, but somebody asked about the limiting beliefs that hold us back. And if you could elaborate on what some of those are. At the very end, you mentioned your limiting beliefs were kind of, be right, be fast, be in control. Are there other limiting beliefs that you see as a common thread?
I mean, there are as many as there are people. And I think to really hone in on, you're not going to think they're limiting beliefs when you start looking at them. You're just going to think they're your core beliefs. And they might be limiting, they might not be. They didn't start by being limiting. I needed those beliefs. I had to believe I was strong and capable because that's what I needed in my early childhood. But the insidious thing about these beliefs is that they've got a shelf life. And that's why you need to constantly go back and say, is this still true? Because at some point it started to hold me back, because then I didn't see that actually I wasn't giving others an opportunity to really be there for me, because I had this idea that I couldn't rely on anyone. So, when you start looking to buy a red car, all you see is red cars. And so limiting beliefs, I mean, for a lot of women, honestly, it's that we have to be the helper, the giver, the doer, the fixer. Nothing's going to get done unless I jump in there. And that, again, we start creating that a life that has us play that central role. And then one day you wake up and you're like, I don't want to do that anymore. Right. And that's when you're like, okay, hold on. How did I get here? How do I unwind it?
Yep. We hear so many people that identify themselves based on their career. Like, when people ask, who are you? Well, I'm a salesperson, or I'm a entrepreneur. That is really a limiting belief, because there's so much more to who you are.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. One of my favorite sayings is, we're human beings, not human doings. Right. And when you start looking at yourself and self-reflecting and focusing on your personal development, there's really, you can either add to your toolkit, and that's the doing, but the real growth comes when you start taking a look at behaviors or beliefs that you have, that you've held onto for a long time, that may not be working. And it's like, oh, okay, let me see if this one still makes sense, and kind of peeling off. And that really is the deeper, more depthful horizontal growth. Vertical growth versus horizontal growth.
Yep, I love that. This last question comes to us from someone who I know is in HR. She asks, what does leading with love look like in the business place?
It's a great question. The best analogy I use is, it's like being a parent. If you're a parent, right? You love your kids, but you don't give them everything they ask for all the time, because that really wouldn't be love. And so, being in HR requires you to be an advocate for the employee at certain times, but also at the same time an agent of the company. And so it really requires us to be looking at the organization out of both those lenses, and to balance those two. And, I think, before 2000, before the 1990s, it was very much the company made the rules and the employees followed. And now I feel like the pendulum has swung to the other extreme, and post-pandemic, post-Me Too, and employees are making a lot of demands. And now what I'm seeing is that leadership is moving in that direction, which is they're giving employees everything they're asking for, and not always in a way I think that is best for them or for the company. And so leading with love is caring, but also being able to set boundaries. It's being firm yet kind. You can carry a tough message, but still come to it from a place of caring. Thank you, Beth. So it's not easy to do, and you can do it. The more you do it, the more you build that muscle. But also, it goes back to that, that self-love, self-compassion. If you're kind to yourself, you're going to be kind with others. If you're tough on yourself, at least that's how I have found it. Maybe not everybody's story is like that, but when I started to be a little more patient, a little kinder with myself, I was able to do it with others too. That's
great. So you have to clean your own house before you help others.
You cook, exactly.
Yep. Well, thank you again for sharing your amazing story and time with us. We sincerely appreciate it. As I mentioned very briefly, Laila is available if you want to bring her into your company as a keynote speaker or coach in any capacity, workshop leader. We'll include in the email we send out how to follow her on Instagram, connect with her on LinkedIn, or if you want more information, you can certainly go to her website, but keep that in mind. And we wanted to thank you guys for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your feedback. So at the end of this, a very short 5-question survey will pop up on your screen, just giving us some prompts on how you want us to continue with this speaker series. And then finally, I wanted to tell you about 2 other events that Encore Retreats is working on. In May, we're hosting a multi-day virtual workshop on how to rock the empty nest. We're bringing in multiple speakers who will share their expertise on finances and wellness and relationships and either career or retirement planning so that you can design a plan for your next and best phase of life. And then in September, we're hosting a fantastic in-person retreat in Virginia called Thriving Through Transitions. So if you want to join us for any of these adventures, please join our mailing list or follow us on Facebook or LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone. We hope you have a fantastic evening. Take care.